So welcome everyone. It is time to tap your personal power and pull up a cup for this episode of the InPower Coffee Break. I'm Mary Brody with InPower Coaching, and today Dana and I are going to talk about political polarization and how to handle that in your own personal conversations. And so we hold these live every Tuesday at noon Eastern to explore InPower topics and strategies that help you achieve work-life satisfaction and lead in a pro-human workplace. So join us live, watch and listen to past recordings at coffeebreak.InPowerCoaching.com and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes at InPower Coffee Break. So I think, Dana, now is time for us to get into it.
And today's topic is challenging, right?
Yes. But I think it's something everybody has been experiencing for a while now, and it seems to be getting worse. I think we had a lot of things out there, a lot of tips on how to handle Thanksgiving dinners, and I think this year is going to be far worse because I think now there are families who are not talking to each other, friends who are estranged because of this political climate, and we make light of it, but and we may joke about it, but it is turning quite serious.
It is, and it's interesting because looking at political polarization in my family historically, kind of like back through the years, this is kind of unique. Like we used to be able to have political conversations that today are much harder to have, and I'm not exactly sure why. I mean, one dynamic that I know is different is that politics used to be very distinct, and I heard someone the other day say this, and it really hit me over the head, which is like our political dialogue is actually invading our pop culture. Right? So you used to be able to talk about the movies and TV shows, and like you could have a completely separate conversation about what was hip and what was new and the new songs and all stuff, which was completely separate. Like a lot of people didn't have politics invading their Facebook feed, and that's not the case anymore. It's like, it just, the politics seems to be all over the popular media, or what people are paying attention to, I should say. And so it's making it much harder to kind of separate out these parts of our lives. And I haven't personally decided if that's good or bad. I mean, on the one hand, more people are paying attention to the political reality, which I think is important. On the other hand, it's making it hard to focus on the non-political stuff. So where do you come down on that? Is that a good thing or not?
I think it has turned into, I think it's a lot. I don't see the political discussions as bad. I think the way that they're discussed is bad. And it's very negative because it's not, before you could have different sides and you'd learn something and it'd be factually based and different perspectives, and it was debate, and it could be kind of fun and you'd learn something through the process. And now I don't feel like there's much learning to be had. It's more, I think this, and that's all there is to it. And then someone else says, well, I think this, and that's all there is to that. And there's no trying to find a common ground. Seems like that's dismissed from the conversation now.
Well, so I'm going to push back just a little bit on some of that. Just again, thinking about like in my own experience, how the conversations have shifted and changed. One thing that I noticed is I remember lots of conversations where, one party seemed to have more facts than the other. I mean, I can even talk about my husband and I in this context. He used to read the paper more than I do. Now I read as much as he does. But, like he always had more facts. And it was always a struggle to have a factual conversation when one party has more facts than the other. So that's always been hard. What I see as different, not just in my own personal family, but just more broadly, is people are giving facts less weight.
Yes, that's alarming.
And arguably, facts are the one things we can agree on because they're neutral. Now, of course, facts aren't neutral, and we're seeing that in spades here. But arguably, when you're in an argument, one of the main things to do is to come up with what we can agree on. And usually, facts are a good place to start. They're never where you end up. That's never where conflict gets resolved. But often it's what you hold on to. Can we both agree that this is true and this is true? Yes. Okay. Now we have something to hold on to. But when you can't find anything that you're willing to agree on, as you say, there's no point in having a discussion, because then it's just what I think and what you think, and it's not important to agree on anything. And so, the fact that facts don't carry much weight anymore, I think is pretty disturbing. But equally disturbing are people's willingness to go sit on their talking points and not try to understand anything else. And I blame both sides for this. I don't,
Yes,
both sides doing this.
Yeah, I find now going to either side, before I used to enjoy the political armchair thing and go to different sides of the arguments and see what they had to say and contribute where I could. Now I find going to both incredibly distasteful, and there's too much the mudslinging. I'd actually say monkey poop slinging, because that's what it starts to turn into, and name calling, and there is that perspective of facts. I actually had an interesting conversation with someone the other day about this, about facts. And I'm like, about how, and it's what you said about how we could agree at one point on certain things, right? And I'm like, if at one point, if someone looked out and said, well, the sky's purple, we'd all just look at them and be like, right? Like, you're a crazy person. And now it seems that you can do that someone can say it's purple, and you would have a contingent that would say, you know what, you might have a point. And we didn't have this phenomena before, I don't think. I think it was more like the grass is green.
No, I think we did have this phenomenon. I think this phenomenon has always been there. And I say that because psychologically, we're always more, we believe before we think, right?
That's true.
So, this is just how the human mind works, right? We have a belief, and then we find facts that align with it. And when we find facts that don't align with it, we have different responses to it. And one of them is push it away. Like, okay, I don't know what to do with that information. It runs counter to my belief. It challenges my belief. So I'm not going to pay attention to it, or I'm not going to pay as much attention to it. And it's a small populace that's mindful enough that kind of says, well, wait a minute, no, if it doesn't agree with me, I really need to lean into it and learn from that. And that's just the way the human mind works. I think what's different is that people are realizing the power of that. And they're willing to go, well, hey, my beliefs really matter. So I get a chance. I can stand on that. And I didn't think they used to feel confident standing on their beliefs. And now there's certain, we're given permission to do that, but it's created a different kind of a public discourse that is making it harder to find middle ground. And I remember, politically, like 15 or 20 years ago, we're kind of like, wow, all the candidates look the same on both, right and left. They all look the same. Doesn't matter who you vote for. And today we've gone to the exact opposite extreme where nobody looks alike. Everything is polarized. I have to believe we're going to come back into the middle. But to get to the topic that we're trying to discuss here, which is how do you survive that, right? And to me, that question is both how do you survive it and keep your own sense of, what is real and what is not, and what do you believe, and also your relationships, like this is, like you said, this is tearing families apart, or threatens to tear families apart. So how do you manage that? And also, assuming this is a pendulum, how do we swing back and feel good about ourselves in the process? Like we don't come back and go, oh, I behaved terribly, so now I hate myself, or I can't imagine that I can't let myself hate myself, so I can't swing back with the rest of the world, into more civil conversation again. So to me, those are the things that keep me up, is how do we do this gracefully and make it part of our personal development and our relationship development instead of just traumatic, which is the way a lot of us are experiencing it. You got any strategies?
Well, I don't. One is avoidance, right? Like you avoid those conversations with people. I know in some cases and this is one of the challenges I think I have with some of the conversations, is they're borderline getting on human rights issues, which gets a little weird to be debating certain core human rights. or having a debate about what's racism, right? And it's almost like, well, I thought we already did this socially. Guess we never did. Guess we didn't finish, right? I think that's the key word. We didn't finish. The civil rights movement's just as active today as it ever was. But then to a certain group of people, it is not, right? Like to them, it's over and we need to go back to where we were before, like it never happened. Or at least that's the perception. And in some minds, they see it as where we've moved forward, but they don't see the full impact of what moving forward means. And I think when you start getting into those conversations, that's when it's like, it's hard to handle. And do you have the energy, right? And the facts to discuss it? Because some of these discussions, I think, do require people with professional training and experience. And this is what they do, right? They're a researcher in this area to provide the proper information in the best way. But then at the same time, then we go back to, well, we're in a world of all, the post-truth, alternative facts era. So then people have an interesting perspective of that. So then it's like, oh my God, how can you have a conversation? So then you don't.
Well, yeah. And I'll give you my one tip. It's the only thing that keeps me sane for all of this, which is I think about, well, okay, what's my real objective for each conversation? So I have a group of people that I socialize with that totally agree with me, and we disagree, so much on the edges. So when I'm talking to those people, I'm just looking for venting and to be comfortable. And I know that's my objective in that conversation, and sometimes to learn and to feel like I'm not crazy, right? But then I'm talking to some other people, well, that is not the case. I'm not going to get validated here. And so I have to have a different objective for that conversation. And I try to make it one of, learning, getting exposed to the other side. On the other hand, some of those are really hard. And then I have to say, well, okay, maybe in this conversation, I do just need to leave because it's abusive. Maybe it's abusive to me. But sometimes it's not abusive. Maybe all I have to do is stand for what I stand for. Like for, taking a stand in a way that's not abusive to them. I'm serving the things I believe, and that's the best I can expect out of that. So, in each of these, I try to decide what's the best, what's my best outcome. And it's different in different conversations. And I notice there's a lot of people that's not the case. Every conversation is about validating their opinions and their feelings. And that's where we run into trouble. And those are usually the conversations I end up having to leave.
Right. That's an interesting point with the validation. I've noticed that too, that there is this, like, sometimes you're in a conversation, instead of like exchanging ideas and like, I never thought of it that way, or that's an interesting perspective, you start hearing this, I need to be right.
Mm-hmm.
And they use being right as currency.
Yeah.
And it becomes like, I'll trade you, I'll be wrong on this if you'll let me be right on this. And sometimes it's like, wait a minute, but your facts are just wrong. Like, what are you doing? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And those conversations, I know I have to exit pretty quick because I'm like, this is just not the way I communicate.
Yeah, and a lot of the time we get, we think each conversation is, we can be right. And that's the other thing is it's not about pounding the other person into submission.
Right.
Because that's not going to happen. And if it does, it's just, it's fake gratification. But I think that, there are times when you're talking to somebody where you can kind of make your point. You may or may not shift their perspective, but they'll let you make your point. And we should take advantage of those opportunities. And we should make the effort, not, as you said earlier, to poke the bear. We don't want to provoke people who are trying to be balanced about it or trying to be polite about it. We don't want to poke them into submission, which, by the way, I will just fess up. When I talk to my brother, I almost always poke the bear. And sometimes, very rarely do I really do it on purpose, but sometimes, subconsciously I do. And it's terrible. And I know that. And, it's not bringing us closer. I know that too. But, I have to fight that instinct in myself, just like you're talking about. And it's harder with family members like with him than it is with people I don't know. People I don't know, sometimes it's easier for me to just walk away, whatever.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, there's certain things I think that there have been themes that have been popping up for the past, I'd say, over 20 years in politics, and in our in the way things have been moving regarding regulation or lack thereof in certain sectors, and how funding has gone for like politicians and things like that. And I think that now it's become more factual, right? And I think this is where things also become interesting in a conversation as well. When you're seeing certain issues that you're like, wait a minute, this is kind of common knowledge, or at least I take it as common knowledge. And someone else looks at you and says something completely different, and then you try to show them facts. So I have this discussion frequently with certain people about the influence of money in politics, right? And to me, it is a given. Right. And there's a different family all the time, but there's a family behind it, or there's an industry behind it. Right. And they're funding their perspective and the lobbyists and whatever. Right. And you try to have a conversation sometimes with someone who says, no, that's not true. It's just government's broken. And then it's like, oh my God, what planet do you live on? What planet? Do you see the news? Do you see all these books? Do you see all this literature that has been coming out now for over 20 years? And you don't acknowledge it. Like, and I think that's the frustrating part. I know that's where I get really frustrated, is the lack of acknowledgement of trends like that have been happening for a long time.
Yeah, but I'll push back a little bit and say that sometimes when people say, no, that's not it, it's something else. We were talking about this before. Like there's this somewhere there's a resolution to this conflict, and you could see the same challenge similarly, right? But the problem is, up here at the top, you're not down to the core yet of what that is. There's these layers of vocabulary and fact and assumptions about causation. You're assuming this fact causes this outcome, and they're seeing that differently, whether it's because they believe it's not causal, or they're seeing other things or whatever. And to have the conversation to really get through those layers of perspective, to get to the point where you're seeing the same kinds of things in the same kinds of way, enough to have that agreement or disagreement conversation meaningfully. You're not getting down to that level. So people say, no, that's not it. Well, they may actually be saying, well, you're right that there's something broken. I just think it's something else.
Right, which is fine. But what I start to notice is that there is not acknowledgement of the trend. And sometimes it goes to like, well, I see it differently. Well, how do you see it, and what's going on in your world? And then you actually get a block. And that's where I think the frustration starts to happen, is that you're trying to find out, like you're doing a debate conversation. So how do you see the world? And even if you ask the question, so how do you see the world? Because I don't understand how you see the world. Then you get back, well, I just see it this way, but there's not much more to it. And when you start having a conversation like that, it's like, well, why do you see the sky as purple? And someone says, I just do. And it's like, well, okay, so I guess we have to stop here, because I can't, like you said, you can't get down to the bottom root of the funnel. Because I agree with you, there is an underlying root to a lot of our problems in our society. And I know we discussed this before the conversation. We probably should not go into that part of the conversation, because that's a whole topic unto itself. But to get to that level, it's almost like there's an unwillingness to go there and to examine it in more detail.
There certainly is some of that. And I see some of that as being malicious in the sense that it's like, I just want to disagree. I just want to be one of the people. I want to be a troll, right? I just want to be out there disagreeing with everybody. And then there's some of it is not malicious, which is, I really don't understand it well enough. I don't understand it well enough, so I'm just going to sit on this belief which makes sense to me. And actually, this is why it kind of brings me to what my final point, to the extent I have one, on this topic, advice is that part of the problem is, so there's people like you and me trying to figure it out, trying to have conversations with people we like and don't like and care about and don't care about. We're trying to figure it out. And then there are the people who are having that conversation publicly, right? And these are all the way from academics and journalists who are trying to do it, according to sort of, some structure, all the way to just opinionator bloggers who really are just looking for clicks, right? And fake news people who are just looking for clicks. So in all that public dialogue, that's where we all get our talking points, right? I mean, we don't make this stuff up. I mean, some of us do, but for the most part, we don't. We're picking up talking points off of, for lack of a better word, off the web. And so I think we, to some extent, I don't think we're going to have this rapprochement and this ability to find common vocabulary until those public voices get better at it, right? Because that's feeding all of us. So what can we do? Well, what we can do is kind of go back to asking ourselves in every interaction, who do I become through this conversation? When I poke the bear of my brother, I don't feel good. I go, I should not have done that because, he's my family and I want to have all these other interactions with him. And I want to stop doing that. And so that's my personal challenge, right? That's one of my personal challenges. And same thing with some other people in my life. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to get together with my friends and vent because it feels good and I learn from them, but you just have to be so intentional through all this and try not to let it tear apart either your family, the people that are important to you, and your self-perspective, right? Your self-identity. You don't want to just bend over to everybody either. You need to stand for something. So walking this balance and coming out on the other end, the person you want to be, to me, that's our individual challenge through this.
Yeah, that's true.
Which means sometimes we have to walk away.
Right. I think unfortunately I've seen that as like the most effective strategy that I've been using in these types of conversations is just walk away and keep my own self intact. Unless there is someone who is willing to go explore more, or share their thoughts, right, on the issue and how did they get to their conclusion. But if someone's looking out and I'm like, well, the sky was blue today, and they go, no, it's purple, and I'm like, why do you say purple? And they come back with, well, it's purple. Then now I'm starting to learn that's cue for you can't explore with them. They're just not gonna go there. So let it lie and move forward. If someone else says it's purple and they go, well, because of this and this and this reason, don't you see that purple tinge? I mean, okay. I don't agree with you, but that's okay. That's your view. But I see at least where you got it. Like maybe it's like back at school, like when they'd have stuff with math and they'd say, show your work, right? I remember in math class, as you got more from the little kid school to like college level, like you'd show your work. And I remember in stats class, because, oh God, that class was just so difficult. Professor was teaching one thing, problem set was something else.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, I'm teaching myself. I remember going to see the TA and trying to understand, and TA didn't speak English. So then you'd go to the final and you'd show your work. And I remember there would be like parts of my work that was completely wrong. And they would go in and like the TA would be like, I don't know what that is. Okay, that makes sense. This makes sense. This makes sense. You get 75%. It was like this touchy feeling of how much credit I'd get. But we're no longer in a black or white zone, right? It's a lot of gray. That's okay. But if you show your work, then people understand you.
Or have a better chance of understanding you.
Right. And then you get some credit for that.
Yeah. Well, yes. And that's that's a good analogy and another way to think about this, which is, what kind of friendships and relationships do you want? And we didn't really talk about this at work, but that's another dynamic of this, which is that, at work often, we don't want to get into debates with people we work about that are going to polarize us when we need to come together. And so, in a work environment, we're often better at managing these things because we have a common purpose, which is to do our job. And maybe we should learn from that, right? maybe we should try to bring that into other parts of our life.
I agree. I see it often at work too. You almost have code until you feel comfortable with someone to talk about, because things are so polarized. that you talk with people who are like-minded. And if they are very separate, you kind of put up the boundary. Unless it's something, unless they do have a personality type that you can have that discussion and everybody's fine with it. Right. And everybody's open about it. And it's not like using being right as currency or trying to assert I'm correct. There's none of that. It's we're all learning. Maybe that's part of the thing is try to find people who are about like, we're all here, we're all learning.
Well, and sometimes learning and having relationships with people who don't agree with you is uncomfortable. And so getting comfortable with a certain level of discomfort, allows us to do that learning, to do that growing, to have, to achieve those other things. But to the extent we're not comfortable being uncomfortable, it's going to be really hard to bridge these divides.
Yeah, that's true.
So do we solve anything in our half hour of...
I don't think so. I do think though, like we do have some strategies for people though, that if they, if they, instead of just walking away, right. Cause that's the obvious, like just walk away, but, try to maybe gauge if someone can have that conversation and can go do that exploring and discussion with you. And I'd say also like when you're talking about the funnel, like try to see if you can explore and go to that root cause with someone.
And how close to the root cause can you get?
Yeah. And if you're not, and again, if you're not going there, it kind of goes to the whole like abandoned ship. I think
what we're saying is if you're going to abandon ship, do it intentionally because you tried to find common ground and it was going to cost you too much to do that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We can't allow ourselves to be abused in these discussions.
No. And that goes for, I think both sides. Cause I've talked, I know
Absolutely.
Cause I know
this is all true for both sides.
Yeah. Cause I know that nobody wants to be abused through this whole thing. And I don't think anybody should be. And I think there are people on both sides who do want to go further. I think my favorite is, George Will. Cause whenever I would watch him on debates, with other people, he does go there and he sometimes does change his opinion. I have seen him do that on shows, like change his perspective, or just have the discussion in a very civil way. I kind of miss those discussions, right? Like when you'd have This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and I remember looking forward to that. And with George Will and what's her name, Brazil, and some of the other ones, they would all sit around and talk about their different and share their different perspectives. And it was great because you got to learn a lot and they learned, I think, too. But we don't see that anymore. There's no role model like that anymore.
Well, yeah. And, it is out there, but it's harder to find. And so I guess you just have to look for it. And I will give myself a piece of advice here, which I said, we can't allow ourselves to be abused in these conversations. We can't allow ourselves to be the abuser either. So like me poking the bear of my brother, I got to stop that. Okay. Right here, I'm making a public declaration. My relationship with him and his family is too important to let me do that. And by the way, it goes both ways. Don't let me.
Right. Right. No, I know.
We both get to this point where we're just poking and we're not listening. So I got to stop that.
Yeah, I hear you. I know this is why when it gets political, I tell my dad all the time, like, we're not doing this. Like, let's just not go there. Cause it just doesn't end. And it would, I think, end better. Again, it's the whole, if you're going down that funnel, it's a little different. And it's a different feeling. Again, it goes back to George Will and Donna Brazile, right? Having these with George Stephanopoulos and all that jazz, having these conversations every week, they were getting to root causes and they'd go back and forth and give each other, kudos for this and kudos for that. And again, I wonder if that's the challenge, right? We don't see that type of conversation anymore. We see talking heads on that are very distinct partisan talking heads, not necessarily a mixed set of talking heads who go head to head, but in a nice way. Like, in the end, you feel kind of rewarded, like you got something out of it.
And that's what I said before, is that I think that the answer on the social scale some of those talking heads have to start coming back
Right.
into conversation. And I'm talking, we're talking about, journalistically, politically, on the Hill, in our local communities, like we can't solve this when we're arguing with our family members.
Right.
And maybe we make progress, maybe we don't. But at the end of the day, if we alienate people that we really want there on our deathbed or on their deathbed, that's a bad thing. So I think our objectives in our individual conversations is different than the kind of public discussion. And the public discussion is going to have its own cycle. And we really have to take care of our discussions and our life and our relationships, so that when that public discussion swings back, hopefully closer together. Hopefully we're at an extreme right now. We can still have the relationship with our family members to come back together too, right?
Well, I'm actually, like, when you're talking about this, George Will's going to be back on MSNBC. He's moved over there. So I'm kind of excited. I was thinking about this, like him, when a conversation with him and Greta and Rachel Maddow could be very interesting, because they're all very different perspectives, but I think there's the respect there that they wouldn't railroad each other, and it would probably be quite productive and entertaining, and would learn how to have these discussions again. Rather than like, where's my frying pan? Bam!
Right. And it's interesting you mentioned that some of the pieces are moving around on the game board, right?
Right.
In the journalistic community, and to some extent politically, although less so right now, but maybe that'll happen. And yeah, we should follow those conversations and see if they can, lead us out, give us the new vocabulary to get out of this polarization with people that we find credible and we, are willing to believe. And that's the other thing, is we have to pay attention to our own judgments about who we're believing and why, and make sure we really think that's good. Because if somebody else tries to tell us that our believing person X is valid, we're just going to push back. But if we decide, no, I believe person X is valid, now I can own that shift in myself.
Right.
As opposed to making somebody else make me do that.
Right.
Well, I don't know if we solved this, but we sure did eat up half an hour real quick.
Oh yeah, I'll just one more thing to add is that there was recently, I think in Toronto, it's coming up or was just happened. It was a conversation about the press and like what we were talking about having better conversations about these issues. And I know one of the things that came up was that the panel, like Naomi Klein was there, and Amy Goodman and Glenn Greenwald. And then they realized that the next thing is like also getting into diversity of color, because they realized the panel was now too white.
Yeah.
And we've got that's the next challenge to get through, is start to not make it such a white person conversation.
Yeah, well, I think there's lots of science now behind the idea of diversity in conversation and problem solving, and they're not really. And when I say there's science behind it, there's science behind diversity in terms of both, the color and the gender, but also the thought styles, and to some extent, color and gender is a proxy for different ways of thinking and different cultural backgrounds. And so diversity, when people of diverse makeup get together and really try to solve a problem, they do it better than a group that all looks and thinks the same. And but getting value for that in our society is going to be farther behind the science. But it's certainly something we should all strive for.
All right.
Okay. Well, yeah. If anybody else has any great strategies on this for personal survival or public impact, please share in comments.
Well, thanks everyone for tuning into this episode of InPower Coffee Break. And please visit us at coffeebreak.InPowerCoaching.com to see upcoming topics, past recordings, and learn how you can join us live. Have an Empower Day.
Bye.